back with our second conversation this morning. Joining us in studio and Zoom, we have members of the Caribbean Media Training. We have one of the organizers, Ms. Deidre Haylock, and one of the representatives from the Caribbean Media Association and media trainer, Wesley Gibbings. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, and thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So, again, we were just talking off camera, and I said I have no idea what this is. So please, for a novice like myself and for those of you watching, what is the Caribbean Media Training and why is it important for us to even have this discussion?
Well, April, from the time I came back after studying journalism, I wanted to see a fuller media training offered to Belizeans here, because that opportunity to go away is not there for everyone.
Right.
And so back then I started on a very junior level, and I started training persons in different organizations to have their own media shows to promote their messages and their agenda. Some years later, I took the lobbying a little higher and tried to see if we could get the tertiaries to reintroduce some kind of formal certificate training of a sort, because that's how I was formally introduced. I started with the media informally at 15 at Coconut Wireless in San Pedro, just showing up after school, writing news, editing copy, and I liked it. And then I came back to the city and I met Tanya York, and Broadcasting Corporation of Belize was in full swing then, and her dad was in charge of Friends FM then.
Ed York, right?
Right, Ed York, God rest his soul. And we lobbied to have a music teenage show. And we started doing it, and that was how both her and I were introduced into what the UWI School of Continuing Studies had then in Belize, which was a certificate course that was done on Saturdays for persons who were working in the media. And that was my first official training. And I realized the value of what that meant for you determining what you wanted to do in a career, and liking it and learning the basics and the nuts and bolts. So over the years, things changed and that course disappeared. Sixth form used to offer electives, and those kind of disappeared. And so I started lobbying and pushing and, you know, just knocking on doors and seeing where it would go. In 2017, I think I had a meeting with representatives from Galen, and they were looking at how they can do that. One of the big things that has always impacted from a reintroduction is the level of interest. Because yes, they're educational institutions, but they have to pay for these professors. It's a heavily resource-based field if you're going to go into broadcasting, per se. And you have, if you don't have the equipment of your own as a school, then you have to have relationships with media houses so that they become the practicum environment for the persons. And that didn't take off. Some years ago, I met Wesley and started participating in the Association of Caribbean Media Workers trainings and sessions. And I knocked on his door and said, would you know, do something like this for free in Belize, because the salaries of existing media workers are so small. And also to kind of try and get them to latch on, you want to present something that will have the credibility, will have some sort of respect behind it, and will allow them to kind of, you know, get involved. Every other profession has an association that does these career enrichment along the path, and we don't have it for media. And I thought, okay, let's see if learned persons who are far more experienced in the field than I am in the Caribbean would stand alongside us and introduce something. And then from there, I could see where we take this.
Before we get into the aspects of the training, I do want to ask, we center ourselves and our lives, the entire world, around media. So why is it that we can't seem to take off into having media be something taken seriously as a profession in education and in training? What is it in our culture that's stopping us from getting there?
Can I?
You want to answer that question?
In part. And I know Deidre is the guest, but if I could share how I got involved as well, and then maybe you could
have a
build
conversation
response from there, right? So I can recall that when I attended junior college at SJC, these courses weren't being offered at all. And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? And my interest had always been in reading and writing, but to be able to present on a particular platform, so to speak. And I realized that the fact that it wasn't offered at the tertiary level, back then it was the University College of Belize, right? So SJC did not offer, neither did UCB at the time. So I was fortunate enough to be able to study journalism abroad in the United States. When I came back, what I observed in terms of the landscape was that the media houses weren't too big on hiring the people who are qualified in the area. Come back with your diploma that says, okay, I am, you know, at a bachelor's or a master's degree level in terms of my studies of journalism. What I observed instead was the fact that they took young people with a certain proficiency in the English language, right? So once you have perhaps an O-level English at sixth form, they figure, okay, well, you could work, you could do this. But I think what they fail to realize is that journalism is a discipline. It's not only technical proficiency in being able to write a sentence in English. It's more your ability to be able to conduct an interview and gather information, processing and then presenting that information to an audience that is diverse with people who have various degrees of knowledge of a subject area. And so that was my thing, right? I saw that and I said, okay, well, this is what I've learned, and I'm in a field or an area where I'm competing with other people for a job that they don't necessarily have all of that skill set. But the employer is okay with that because they figure you learn as you go along. I think that has worked for and against us in terms of the development of media in Belize. Because while it's baptism by fire and you'll gradually learn, in terms of being able to adhere to and uphold certain code of ethics and the responsible way of reporting, that misses a lot of people who don't have the opportunity to train or to get the formal education.
Isani's experience is not much different from mine. After I finished with UWI, I finished sixth form, and I was able to get a scholarship to go away and study. And I did my studies at a Christian university. And so responsible journalism, responsible media and media management were enforced. But even outside of that Christian education setting, it is a discipline. And when you get the opportunity to become exposed, you learn that. The responsibilities are high for a media worker, a journalist. Anybody that can put up a mic and speak on an issue, the responsibility is high because you have the potential to influence, to shape. And I did see some of that. When I came back December 95, January 96, 23 years old, and I was on Channel 5 anchoring news and reporting news. And even though I had done the training, I had been a news anchor on my university television station, I had been a weather person on the television station, I had worked on the radio station. When you get behind that mic and you realize the power of what is in front of you, it can be daunting. And what I've learned is that, like Isani said, the persons who've had the opportunity for the formal education appreciate the disciplines and the structure around it that gets lost if that exposure is not there. And that's particularly one of the reasons why I kept agitating, because I realized that I received a blessing, I received an opportunity that not everybody will have. And if this profession that I'm liking is to grow and develop, then we within it also have to grow and develop, because that's how it will earn the respect.
Right.
When I worked at, when I went to sixth form, there were 2 electives. By the time Isani got there, those were gone. When I started at television station, there was a fractioned association, and then it disappeared by the time the 1998 elections was rolling around. It just defunct. And so I was left with that yearning to see that happen. And I remember around that time we had also a U.S. ambassador, a female U.S. ambassador, who was also a journalist. And I used to have conversations with her about getting an association going. And there's some obvious challenges with doing that, but it never left my yearning. And so I'm hoping that with this opportunity for a training, we can develop a nucleus of persons. And in my aspirations towards an institute to keep training refreshers going on, we can have a nucleus of current media persons who I can try to assist through the institute that I'm working with an attorney for us to register and get started, for us to propel that. Because the responsibility of answering your question of being respected and recognized lies with us who love the profession and who perform in the profession, so that we can set for ourselves the standards and the ethics that we would like to see for our profession in Belize. The Bar Association does that for the legal profession. There's a BMDA, which is the Medical and Dental Association, that does that for doctors. There's a Nurses Association. There are teachers' unions and associations, and we are no less honorable to have that. In fact, I think we are even more, because we bear a huge responsibility and impact on shaping and having an influence. And I think the way we carry ourselves and the way we perform in our profession will do a lot of good for gaining what you asked us about.
And I'm glad that you've mentioned all of that. But as someone who is presently active in the media, in journalism, what I've also observed is that there are competing interests that unfortunately prevent us from being able to form an association, to be able to look after the best interests of those persons who are media workers. Because you look at various media houses and companies, everybody has their own agenda that they put forward before they look at being able to strengthen the capacities of those that work.
Well, I think one of the challenges with the previous association is that the editors, who were more than often at that time the owners, were part of that association. And yes, there's a place for editors, owners to have an association, or particularly the owners to have an association, but that is a different, that's a horse of a different color. The technical workers do need that so that they can shape that, and it should be apart from what the owners and the owners' interests are.
Exactly, and so I do want to get into the actual training itself, and I do want to bring Wesley into the conversation as the media trainer at the Caribbean Media Association. So Mr. Gibbings, can you walk us through what the trainings will look like, and how is the Caribbean Media Association a part of it?
Well, to answer the question, April, much of what Isani and Deidre have said resonate very clearly with us at the Association of Caribbean Media Workers. And Isani raised some very important points. And I think if I can just provide a little bit of a backstory in terms of the development of the ACM over the years. The ACM was really founded on three basic pillars. One, and the first and foremost, is press freedom advocacy. It is at the base, at the philosophical foundation of everything we do. So even in pursuit of the other two pillars, the other one being regional networking. And we're very, very happy to be associated with this event on May the 28th, because it provides us with an opportunity to spread our wings even wider than they have been spread before. And just by the way, the journalists in St. Kitts and Nevis have recently revived their national organization, and they asked to be a part of this. And so we gladly embrace them. I think it's a good opportunity for your colleagues in Belize to interact with some of the colleagues in St. Kitts and Nevis. So the networking is important. And the third most important pillar, the third vital pillar of the work of the ACM is training and / professional development. Now, some years ago, about 5 years ago, we decided that the training function of the ACM really requires a professional approach. And so we set about developing the Media Institute of the Caribbean, which now operates as an autonomous, independent body, linked to the ACM, but essentially leading the training efforts. Now, the ACM is involved in this particular activity because we are seeing the potential for pursuit of the first two objectives of the ACM. So we envisage that there will be further interactions with the Belizean media, or specifically on key features of training. Because as both as Isani and Deidre have said, you're dealing with a wide variety of very specific skills, and they need to be attended to in at a fair level of detail. Now, Deidre will tell you that at the MIC, we have not only pursued sort of generic media skills, but subject-specific skills as well. And one point, before I get into the details of the program, I followed the interview you did on TradeWinds 2022, and so much of it resonated with what we're dealing with now that you could probably swap the metaphors, because the TradeWinds exercise is regional in scope, but is intended to pursue the more fluent, the more fluid, and more effective pursuit of the protection and the safety of our people. And if it's one lesson, one takeaway from this pandemic period, is the indispensability of strong media in the face of great social need. And the journalists and the people of Belize would do well to understand that particular point.
I'm noticing the draft for the event on the 28th, and based on just everything that we have been discussing this morning, I don't think half a day is enough. So because this is your first
this is a wet your foot peak interest kind of activity.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about the activities and what hopefully people can expect at this training?
Okay, well, there are 4 different topics, as you saw from the agenda, and we tried to hit certain high points, looking at journalism and law, looking at the ethics of journalism, looking at verification and fact-checking, and also looking at where we're at in the development of media, because now we have digital media. And we have these big techs, and a lot of how these big techs are operating is seeping into areas where, quote unquote, MSM, mainstream media, operated. And how do we as MSM, mainstream media, and mainstream journalists adapt in this changing time? How is it impacting us? How can we impact it in our jurisdiction and shape it? And so that kind of lively discussion. So rather than a word training, I think this is an opening of conversation with the guide of seasoned professionals and with the camaraderie of colleagues from within a jurisdiction and colleagues outside of the jurisdiction. And it's hopefully to energize and to light a fire within our media workers for wanting to introduce more structure and to shape how their industry and their profession functions. And yes, there are competing interests, like Isani mentioned, but you as a journalist also play a role. And how do you use that role and that influence that you have? I've participated in so many of the MIC and ACM trainings, and to listen to these seasoned journalists talk about the challenges they faced, how they used their skill, their influence, their experience to navigate these. Just the last training we did on Press Freedom Day talked about the influence of big tech, talked about competing interests, talked about economic viability, talked about the challenges faced during a pandemic. And so I think it is rich for our media workers to be able to have a platform for them to engage in those kinds of discussions, for them to benefit from the camaraderie of regional partners, and for us to see how can we shape and get back to a time when there's an association that looked out for the technical workers within the field, and how do we bring them to the fore to lead that association for themselves and to develop the structures for that association for themselves, but with guidance of persons who've walked the walk so many times. Wesley just mentioned St. Kitts coming back on board. So we're not the only country dealing with struggles to get ourselves formalized and to have representational force for us at the level that we need to have. And so I think their learning experiences and the successes that they've achieved in the Caribbean can help us, because we're not much different from their jurisdictional experiences, their political experiences, their social climate. And so there's a lot to gain from this. And so I was very happy when Wesley said, yes. In fact, I think we started talking about it in 2020, right, Wesley? Just before the pandemic hit us. But he stayed at the table, you know, and we stayed at the table with it. This year, he had a very busy year with ACM from January to April. And so he's wheeling out after a very hectic first quarter calendar. But I'm glad that he was able to stay at the table with us for this.
So this training, can somebody that has never been thrown into the media world before, can they be a participant?
Well, we're trying to prioritize first those who are already in the media, like yourself, who's already in the media. In Belize, we tend to have a jack of all trades kind of thing.
Yes.
And so you might find that a radio announcer at some point has to double as a journalist because of short staff, or has to read the news because that's on their shift. And so we're looking at the journalists who are doing the news, and we're also looking at the adjoining media workers who do the work like what you do here on the morning show. And thereafter, then we can look outside of that, but we really are hoping that those that are in the field would latch on. The training is, of course, virtual, because our trainers are all in the Caribbean, and I would like Wesley to speak about a couple of the big names that have latched on to this. The training is free. It is Saturday, May 28th at the Belize Institute of Management, and I would like to recognize them for the very minimal charge that they and partnership that they offered to host us. The reason why we're still having a venue is because, at least for those that are in the city, we'd like to have them in one place so that camaraderie and that dynamics work. But also, if you're in the districts, it's virtual. There's a link, so we can get it to you in the districts as well, for you to be able to log on and participate as well. But for those in the city, we're trying to see if we can develop an energy. As Isani said, there's not an association. There's some challenges with bringing us together, and I think the more we bring ourselves together in a room in this kind of a forum, the better the camaraderie, and then we can really look at springboarding towards the association and that kind of formality for us.
Okay, well then I will pass it over to Wesley then, so he can talk more about the participants and the trainers involved in the training for the 20th.
Yes. Now, this will be the first sort of hybrid event that we have been having over the past 2 years, because we're doing everything virtually. And had things been different, Deidre, I would have been sure to be there in Belize. Love Belize, been around quite a bit, been there several times. In fact, I remember visiting the studios back in the early days when Mr. Stuart Crone was there as the founder of the station. You know, really fantastic. And but getting to the program, the thing is, what we have assembled a team to try to cover what we think are some of the important issues to be addressed by journalists in Belize and throughout the rest of the Caribbean. But we're going to keep it to the journalists of Belize, and of course we've invited the journalists from St. Kitts, and happy that they are there. Now, the law, journalism and the law, media and the law, to me is one of the least understood features of the work that we do. And we are very fortunate to have, as a leading member of our team, Justice Katian Waterman-Lachu, who she's actually a sitting judge in the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago, and she has served as a judge throughout the Eastern Caribbean. But the thing with Katian is that she started off her working life as a journalist. In fact, she happens to be one of the best feature writers I've ever come across, and we worked together at the Trinidad Express back in the 1980s. So Katian is going to be looking at journalists and the law, and as to support her, and this was not anticipated before, but the thought came to me that one of the laws, one of the areas of law that's frequently overlooked is the whole matter of intellectual property and copyright. And therefore, we've invited Dr. Justin Koo, who is Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, who is going to be present to answer any questions that might go along those lines. Because journalists, I think, very often forget about some of the obligations regarding intellectual property. I'm going to spend some time looking at one of the core issues of journalism, which is the verification process. It's called the journalism of verification. And if you look at verification as one of those key features of the journalism you practice, you'll find that we will be getting things right to a greater degree than we do now. As I was saying, among the three pillars of the ACM is this whole matter of press freedom. And I'm sure that you would recognize that one of the easiest or one of the surest ways that you can find yourself in trouble and being threatened and you're having your freedom being threatened as a journalist is when there is journalistic malpractice. And journalistic malpractice very often comes along because of overt bias, but even more than that, it occurs when there is an absence of a very rigid, rugged verification process within the confines of the media organizations. We're going to spend some time, not enough. Each one of these 4 topics you can do a 5-day program on them, just focusing on them alone. But the next issue has to do with ethical journalism. And where ethics, codes of practice come into play, and the requirement for media enterprises to have their own internal codes of practice, again, to stave off, to keep at a safe distance the hands of officialdom, because there again, the threat is often extended, particularly by politicians, that if you don't learn how to behave yourself, we're going to find ways to police you and to bring you to book. And in the process of doing that, you find that there's a chilling effect on the freedom of the press. And then we're going to look very importantly at the future of Caribbean media. The Media Institute has recently completed a study on media viability in Jamaica. And what we thought is that some of the metrics employed to measure, to assess the prospects for the viability of media in Jamaica can be and ought to be extended throughout the Caribbean so that media entrepreneurs can have a better fix on where they are as commercial entities. And Belize is no exception to the rest of the Caribbean and indeed to the rest of the world in terms of the challenges being faced by social media in particular, and the fact that you have all of these other emerging platforms that are in some instances supplanting the work of the legacy media. But it's important work that we do because, as I said, if you examine closely the pandemic management of our countries, there has been a reliance on the verified and rigorous work of legacy media more than perhaps any other time before.
Very true. I can't stress enough the amount of times I think that I have seen not accurate information being shown on the media, and the fact that people get away with posting that kind of information. How do you compete with social media? How do you compete with this slow de-evolution of TV and radio? How are you guys going to tackle that kind of conversation?
That is the whole reason for the last discussion, because we realize that we are in an evolving time, and that media what is media has changed over the years. And we are dipping our feet cross-breeding to a large extent. You've seen on our social media where we have so many social media pages that are operating as news pages. And we see a lot of errors in fact in the reporting and errors in discipline in the reporting styles that some of these pages display. And we see our mainstream media or legacy media, as Wesley refers to it, try to compete in terms of timeliness and using the social media platform to put news out. Not just in terms of what we do now with afternoon newscasts, you know, segments of the news is out there and on the internet, but also throughout the day in trying to beat the clock. In my day, beating the clock, we used to do news flashes on TV to kind of beat the competition on presenting teasers for what was going to be on at 6:30. At that time it was 6:30 news, and we went 6:30 to 7, and we were very strict about maintaining a time slot. Now we're doing it on social media, and sometimes you've seen where mainstream media has had to retract a story or edit something that is put on social media. So that is all the reason why for that final discussion, but so that we can look at ourselves introspectively and see where do we fit and how should we actually be viewing that competition that we are viewing as competition, and where we are supposed to maintain differentiation of ourselves in how we use those platforms.
If I can also say this, right? Again, this is observation and the fact that I'm also in the belly of the beast, right? What has been happening more often than not recently is a sort of acquiescence on the part of the legacy media to what is happening on social media, right? Whereby my way of looking at it, if someone, the citizen journalist, quote unquote, happens to post information of something that is developing, I should take that as a lead and then do my due diligence, the fact checking and everything. I can't be so much concerned with the timeliness at that point, simply because I've already gotten beaten by the citizen journalist, who has a drop on what just took place in his or her neighborhood. They have that on me. What I have is sufficient time to be able to do the homework. Who are the players affected? Who are the people involved? What is the issue at hand? All of that, the onus is on me, the journalist, to be able to flesh that out for my audience.
Because the expectation of you as the formal legacy media is much higher. The standards that you have to meet are much higher. The laws and how the laws or how people will treat you in terms of the legal ramifications for what you put out are different. And so you can't just pander to that, and being first becomes secondary. Being accurate, being responsible, maintaining integrity becomes primary. And so you have to...
those are the tenets upon which it's built.
So you have to reposition yourselves, and you have to step back and think about it, because you're not engaging in gossip. You're not engaging in just a social conversation. You're leading the reporting of facts and the account and holding to account formal structures within your societal construct. And so your level of responsibility and the expected level of performance and integrity are much higher on the legacy media than those social media pages. Don't go looking for a license. The citizens journalists don't go looking for a license. You do. The public, they may read what the social media platforms put out, but at the end of the day, they're going to fact check that on you. Right?
Absolutely.
On us.
The onus for credibility is on us.
And if we're not being credible, then you get the blanket black paintbrush, them media people, right? And then you get lumped up all into that. And so it is for us as media workers in the legacy media, in the mainstream media, to take pride in that. to take ownership in that and to set the standards for ourselves and not be so concerned about citizen journalists or social media platform beating us to the punch, but that we have a quality that people will continue to clamor for and continue to look towards, and we have a role and a responsibility to play in our structured society.
Time is officially gone from us, but I do have one more question that I feel only you both can answer. What is breaking news?
No.
What?
Well, one of the trainers that we have at MIC is one of the founding anchors of CNN, Jim Clancy.
Yeah.
And Jim Clancy tweeted recently, "Oh, praise the Lord, the CNN has dropped the breaking news moniker from every single thing that they do." The fact of the matter is that everything is breaking news in terms of the individual circumstances. So the killings, the racially motivated killings in the United States yesterday would be breaking news at a particular level for people who live in the vicinity, and breaking news for us who are looking on. These are all relative formulations. I think breaking news has been bastardized to the extent that its true meaning is lost.
It's so much.
There was a selling point that comes along with that tag breaking news. Right?
There was so much of it during the pandemic, and I have
and all the social media operators think that that's what they're involved in, because they can, within seconds, they can, put their presence there. But the long-term way to address this, and I think UNESCO has put the nail on the head, is a higher level of media and information literacy by the consumers of this material, so that people will be able to distinguish far. It's a long-term project, but I think it's a way of approaching it that does not enter into the terrain of control and more laws and more regulations to silence people.
All right. So one more time for our viewers, when is the training taking place and what time?
The training takes place at May 28th, on May 28th. It starts at 9 in the morning, and we expect to run through to 12:30. To make contact, I have circulated in the media chat, the chat group, my contact information for them to express an interest, or my cell phone number, which is 607-2929. They can drop a WhatsApp or a message, so that we can get, if you're in the districts, get the link to you. If you're in the city, encourage you to attend in person, and to be able to have that discussion in person with your colleagues here in Belize, as well as with the Caribbean trainers and our partners in St. Kitts. I think it promises to be quite exciting. I'm very glad with how it worked out, especially with the introduction of our specialists on intellectual property, but also with the partnership of St. Kitts. And I think that it worked out better than we could have anticipated, Wesley. And I have to say thanks to Wesley and the Association of Caribbean Media Workers for standing alongside this initiative. And I truly hope that our media workers will embrace it, because we have a cadre of young, bright, eager professionals who love what they're doing. And we want to make sure that that passion stays alive, that they don't become disillusioned with what they're doing, and that they have a camaraderie and a support, and we can begin to set the foundation for what can become a nucleus of them coming together to represent themselves and shape themselves. I will never forget, I will never forget in 1998 when they were trying to have the first prime ministerial debate in Belize, and the media was completely bypassed in the organization of that in terms of partnership with the political parties, and they went to spare that organization that existed at the time. And that was like a slap in the face, and how the media was being treated back in 1998. And I think that was what ignited an even bigger fire in me, that something had to be done for us to not be bypassed as a group like that.
There was little to no regard for the Fourth Estate at that point in time.
Oh, of course.
We're struggling now,
of course,
to be formally recognized as such. Yes. But back then it was non-existent.
And I remember we gathered in a room. At the time it was Fiesta Inn, and the U.S. ambassador was there with us. But you said competing interests, and the competing interests of the owners in the room at that time, it didn't work in our favor either to get ourselves to that table. It just fragmented everything.
I think one of the things that I guess people don't think about in terms of the media is that you guys are timekeepers per se. That's how I see it. You're documenting the history that is taking place. You are the primary source of what is happening, and we don't see it now because we're in it. But for somebody like me, when need for know what's happening at like 78, I need like a broke down magazine or something like that to find out, right? So it kind of begs that question as to how we take kind of for granted the media house, and how we kind of just expect that you guys to give accuracy without giving you guys that space to be eligible. But thank you both so much for being on the show this morning, and I can't wait to hear the report about how the training went.
Well, thank you for having us, and Wesley, thank you again.
All right, and
you're most welcome.
Thank you. And with that, we'll take our final break, and we'll be back for a wrap-up, so stay tuned.